Hello and welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Phantom. The rest of the conspirators died in a horrific public spectacle which shocked all the residents of the European missions. The 30 executions were personally carried out by the ministers of state, the offenders being variously bayoneted, gouged, and generally cut to pieces before the watching court. But the spectacle was sufficiently unoriginal to exonerate Erik from any part of its devising. Clumsy, disorganized, and entirely lacking in finesse, it bore the stamp of our new Prime Minister's healthy respect for his own preservation. It was difficult to pinpoint a victim for revenge when the entire government had been obliged to take responsibility for his mass execution. The Shah's French physician, when invited to show his loyalty by wielding a knife at the event, excused himself by remarking humorously that he was already professionally responsible for too many deaths to voluntarily increase that number now. The Shah laughed heartily and appeared to accept the excuse with good grace, but shortly after, the good doctor was served with a glass of poison and died in great agony. Ugh. I, fortunately, was considered of too mean a rank to be honored with an invitation to take part. I was relieved of my duties as spy and bodyguard and sent back to Mazandaran to ensure that no Bobby actively in the region would disturb the Shah in his winter retreat. Consequently, I did not see Erik for many months, and I first knew of the palace's new completion was tend to the Shah the Garden of Echoes. When I arrived, I found the vast audience chamber quite empty. The mass of the court was still at Ashra, the Shah's presence here today being in the nature of passing over the purpose of inspection. For all its palatial exterior, the building was really only an elaborate hunting box, a play pavilion designed to amuse and entertain its royal master. Right from the beginning, there had never been any intention of housing the entire court. Only the favor for few would ever be invited to attend the King of Kings in this whimsical folly, and those who are invited to do so do well to avoid unguarded words in a private conversation. Erik had warned me the palace was not called the Garden of Echoes for nothing. When the Shah appeared abruptly by my side, I was so startled that I dropped the dossier containing details of my loyal activities during the preceding months. He had not entered my room through any of the doors upon which I had been keeping a wary eye, and it seemed to me that I must have walked through the wall behind me. Nothing could have delighted him more than my very genuine stupefaction. "Ah, Daroga," he said with the gloating glee of a schoolboy. "I see I have startled you. An amusing little device, is it not?" "Most amusing, Imperial Majesty." I rose from my knees in accordance with his gesture that I stared in dismay at my documents, which were now hopelessly muddled. I knew that the entire palace had been riddled with secret passages and trap doors for the Shah's exclusive use. Personally, I considered the whole thing very childish, a devilish game of hide and seek which would inevitably result in many tragedies. It was a sad waste of Erik's talent. All he wanted to do was build something beautiful, but at every step of construction he had been dodged by his patron's insatiable demand for novelty and diversion. I knew that the trapdoors and secret passages had been formed no part of Erik's original design. His wonder of architecture had been reduced, at the end of the day, to an elaborate toy designed to please a vicious little boy. Its real beauty was entirely lost upon the Shah. "How do you care for my new house of pleasure?" continued His Majesty. "Would you say it was unique of its kind? Truly unique?" I hastened to assure him that it was. In spite of his glee, there was something querulous and even petulant about his mood which alarmed me. He was like a spoiled child who had been forced to wait overlong for a promised gift, determined to find fault because reality could not quite compare to his dream. "The secret passages are very cramped and airless," he complained. "Quite uncomfortable, in fact. I was obliged to remove my hat." I did my best to look sympathetic. Personally, I considered the greatest miracle of the building was the fact that Erik had somehow managed to keep his hands off his master's neck during the course of its construction. There cannot be another monarch in the world who possesses a palace such as this, I assured him fatuously. You have a great jewel of architecture and a servant who is truly without equal in the world. The Shah frowned and flicked a speck of masonry dust from his voluminous skirts. As he served me, so he may serve others. They say his fame has already spread to Constantinople and that the Sultan seeks to lure him from my service. I felt my mouth turn dry with apprehension. I'm sure your majesty may quite safely ignore such malicious rumors. Eric's loyalty, the Shah laughed abruptly. Do you think it foolish me to enough to believe that man's loyalty? He owns allegiance to no one. And as I know you know very well, Erik is entirely without scruple of any kind. He is a murderer. Worse than that, he is a thief. Thievery worse than murder, huh? A thief? I echoed uneasily. Surely a man of such honestly acquired wealth need not stoop to theft. I believe that he steals purely for amusement, Doroga, to test his powers of legionnaire domain. The matter of the cat's collar was never resolved, as you know, and cut glass has been found on the peacock throne. Glass! There was a time when such shameless arrogance amused me, but the Khan advised me of his insolence, and I find I am increasingly inclined to agree with her judgment of him. A man such as he is not to be trusted with state secrets. The Shah turned away and began to stride restlessly up and down the room. I did not dare argue with him, and after a moment he turned and looked at me thoughtfully. I am relieved that you do not speak in his defense. There have been moments in the past year, Doroga, that I am afraid your own loyalty was not above reproach. I prostrated myself at his feet in the prescribed act of self-abasement, my forehead coming up to rest against the tip of his riding boot. Get up, he said testily. I have devised a perfect means for you to demonstrate your loyalty to me now. I raised my head fearfully. Allah, what was this? It may interest you to know that the Khan suggests I should have his eyes put out. Yes, I thought, a fitting punishment for his crime against her. What are eyes to a man who willingly refuses to see a woman's wretched lust? But on reflection, continued the Shah coolly, I am not convinced that such an act would necessarily extinguish his gifts and render him useless to another monarch. I wish to preserve the unique quality of this palace. He shall build for no other king. Every man who worked upon his site shall be put to death, including its creator. You will rest tomorrow night when he returns to Ashraf. Tomorrow? I echoed dimly. Again the Shah frowned. Tonight he completes a minor alteration that I have required to my private chamber, and I do not wish to be disturbed. Tomorrow I have no further use for him. Seating himself on the dais, he glanced critically around the audience chamber, but evidently found no further cause for complaint that would have gained Erik another night's reprieve. I shall leave the means of execution in your capable hands, Doroga. But to be sure that no damage is inflicted upon the skull, it is my wish that his head should be preserved, with embalming fluids and mounted on a pillar in the Gulistan. The Sultan and the Emir will both be sick with jealousy to hear of my new ornament. I looked at the floor, terrified that my expression would betray my disgust. Well, demanded the Shah brusquely, are my instructions not clear? They are perfectly clear, O shadow of God. I made an elaborate obeisance and backed away from the door. Doroga, Your Majesty, instruct your man to search his apartments very carefully after the arrest. I fully expect that collar to be found hidden among his possessions. Once more, I bowed my head in acknowledgement. I had 24 hours to make my arrangements. Shortly before dawn, my men surrounded Erik's apartment at Ashraf, and I entered his room alone. He was startled. It is customary to knock before entering, he said rather shortly. What the devil are you doing at this hour? I didn't invite you. This is not a social visit, I said loudly, allowing my voice to carry into the corridor and beyond. I come here in my official capacity as chief police of this region to arrest you for treason. You must prepare to leave at once. He began to laugh, but when I made a violent sign for him to be quiet, he was suddenly quiet, watching me curiously. We don't have much time, I whispered. Find whatever you have of portable value and give it to me quickly. He leaned over to touch a hidden spring in the wall, and immediately a stone moved to one side, revealing a small cavity from which he took a casket. I had been working all night to the Shah's personal commission. You find me about to bathe. His voice carried suddenly ecstasy to the ears of my waiting men, and I saw with grief he had accepted the rules of his desperate game. You will be permitted a few minutes in which to dress, I said. He handed me the casket. When I opened, I found a veritable dragon's hoard treasured within. There were precious gems of every description, some official rewards for his services, but many others quite plainly appropriated. I recognized a great diamond that had once belonged to the Mirza Taki Khan, and lying on the bottom of the jewelry box, the missing cat's collar with a fortune of jewels winking in the torchlight. I looked at him accusingly, and he gave me a graceful, almost humorous little shrug. You know my weakness for beautiful things. I smiled as I tipped the contents of the casket into the leather bag and fastened it beneath my coat. He always wished to surround himself with beauty, and now that a diamond or butterfly was of equal value in his eyes, I had to go back to the cavity of the wall to find the money that he had stuffed carelessly at the back and forgotten. When I had emptied the secret compartment, I gestured to him to close it. Give me your hands, I muttered. They will expect to see you bound. For a moment, as he stiffened with anger, I thought his insane pride would ruin everything, that he would sooner die than suffer himself to be tied and constrained like an animal. Give me your hands, I replied with authority. Erik, it is the only way. He looked at the rope with fear and loathing and showed me a grim shadow of his past as I passed the through fibrous binding around his wrist. His fist clenched as though in an effort to restrain some primitive instinct to resist. I felt that I was binding some wild mythical beast. Only the truss which had slowly grown up between us prevented him from turning on me now, and rendering me to pieces with savage claws. His wrists were so incredibly thin that I bound them cautiously, fearing their deceptive, fragile appearance. And as I did, I noticed that the flesh was covering the old scar tissue. How did you come by such injuries? I asked curiously. Was it that window in Tehran? He shook his head briefly, still staring at the bindings as though he could not quite believe he had permitted this thing to be done. I broke a mirror once, he said. A well-meaning and very misguided lady bound up my wrist and saved my life. Your mother? He looked at me, and something in his expression made me shiver. My mother would have let me bleed to death, he said. And who is to say she would not have been right in that, he said stonily. I fastened the rope in silence, once more dumbstruck by the bleak tragedy of his existence. And when I had finished, I went to the door and called my men into the room. Search the apartment and make an inventory of all you find. I turned back to Erik, who stood with his head bent, staring at the floor. You, sir, will come with me now. We rode away from the palace in the light of the rising sun. I lead Erik's horse, and my deliberately depleted escort riding on ahead to inform the prison of our immediate arrival. When the last horse was out of sight, I leaned over, cut the ropes that bound him, and handed him the 2 leather bags I had secreted on my person. Go, I said simply. Follow the coastal road and get out of Persia while you still can. All I can give you is a few hours start before the Shah's men begin to search for you. He sat very still on the horse, staring at me. How will you explain this? I shrugged. I shall say that you used your magical skills to free yourself and attacked me when I was unprepared. You will be punished, he said. He persisted gravely. Even the Shah believes your tale, and if he does not believe it, that is my concern. Why are you doing this? He demanded suddenly. I looked down on the empty road. My son would have wished you to live. All that I do tonight, I do in memory of him. Oh, God, he whispered brokenly. You will never be reconciled, will you? You will never forgive. I turned in the saddle and looked at him squarely. There is nothing to forgive. You came a beautiful, painless death. I have reconciled my souls at peace. It's time to consider your soul now, Erik. He made an impatient gesture. Your faith teaches that infidels have no souls, no appointed place in paradise. Your conscience, then, I countered. I think you have a conscience, whatever you may like to believe. And tonight I appoint myself its keeper. Wherever you go and whatever you do in the future, you may consider yourself answerable to me. That is the price you must pay in order to return for your life. There must be no more wanton murders. Oh, really? He scoffed. And what is to stop me from breaking this ridiculous little bargain of yours whenever I choose? I do not believe you would break your word to me, Erik. What makes you think I'm going to give you my word, let alone keep it? Killing is like opium, Nadir. A bad habit. An addiction. Any addiction can be overcome when there is a will for conquest, I said steadily. Besides, I'm not offering you a choice. This is an ultimatum. If I don't hear from you now what I wish to hear, I shall simply deliver you for your execution after all. You have my word on that. And remember, my men are not too far away to hear a pistol shot. What are you exactly asking me to swear? He said wearily. I'm not a sentimental fool. I sighed. I know what your life has been, and I know there will inevitably be occasions when you have no alternative but to strike to save yourself. But there's a world difference between killing in self-defense and killing for perverted pleasure. All I am asking you to acknowledge the difference and abide me by my request. Now will you give me your word? He did not speak, but after the moment's hesitation, he held out his hand to me, and I met it unhesitatingly with my own. His grip was cool and strong, and I had no desire to shy away from with revolution and dread. I let my hand die in his until he chose to break that moment of contact, that symbol of our simple, sterile friendship. Follow the coastline and keep the undergrowth. It's a dangerous path. You must be aware of quicksand and countless other hazards. But you dare not take an inland road. By tomorrow the Shah's men will be searching all known routes that lead out of the country. He sighed. And you, my poor fool, will be in prison awaiting execution in my stead. Do you honestly think I am so devoid of human feeling that I would leave you to that fate? You need have no fear for my life, I said. I'm not quite the innocent and intrigued, you know. I've made my plans. The body of a Bobby dissident will be left upon the Caspian shore dressed near a cloak and mask. By the time it is found, scavengers will have rendered it identifiable by no other means. I am convinced the Shah will be sufficiently satisfied to spare my life, and should you my estate be forfeited for negligence, well, you have taught me to grow weary of the power of Persian ways. Perhaps I shall go to Europe and settle in a country where queens no longer amuse themselves with torture chambers. Even in Europe you'll need to eat, he said grimly. From within his bag of treasures he produced a handful of precious gems and held them out to me, pausing for a moment on reflection to remove a huge diamond from his palm. I suppose I should not have burned your squeamish conscience with that. I can't pretend it was very much acquired. The rest you may safely take. There is nothing there need to cost you when you sleep. Erik, I protested, this is not. Take them, he said sharply. I've already agreed to your damn acceptance terms, have I not? At least permit me to make one gesture of myself toward my keeper and my friend. We were both silent then, stunned by the harsh simplicity of those two last words. I knew that friendship was an alien emotion to him, as frightening perhaps as it was unfamiliar. Friendship intruded uneasily on his existence, demanding responsibility, accountability, and loyalty, but I did not believe he would lightly cast aside the pledge he had made to me. Removing the mask and cloak, he handed them to me, and I suddenly saw that there were tears glistening unshed in his mismatched eyes. Take care of yourself, Nadir, he said softly. Take care, your tiresome health has become very dear to me. I think I smiled. It was impossible to speak. I sat and I watched him right away until he was only a dim shadow, and then I spoke to the empty expanse that lay between us and the faultless friend she had so painstakingly taught me over the course of our association. Au revoir, mon ami, I said sadly, and tucking the masked cloak safely out of my sight in the saddlebag, I turned my horse's head towards Saori and rode on to the distance. And that is the end of Nadir's point of view. So, I'll see you later.